The creature they called Breaker had been locked in this cage for 12 long years. The reinforced plasma barriers hummed constantly, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own breathing. He was massive, standing nearly 3 meters tall even when hunched in his cell. His thick gray hide was covered in old scars from the fighting pits where the slavers made him perform for their entertainment. 4 yellow eyes tracked everything that moved in the detention block, a habit born from years of watching and waiting. Today started like any other day in this hellish place. The gray-skinned Zenthari slavers moved through their routines with casual cruelty. Breaker had seen it all before. He'd watched them torture information from traders, soldiers, and criminals from a dozen different worlds. After a while, the screams all started to sound the same. But then something different happened. The main doors to the detention block hissed open, and 2 Zenthari guards dragged someone inside. Breaker's sensory tendrils perked up immediately. The prisoner was human. That was unusual. Humans didn't come through this sector very often. They kept to their own territories mostly, and the Zenthari were usually smart enough not to mess with them. The girl couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. She was small compared to Breaker, maybe 1.5 meters tall, with brown hair that stuck to her face with sweat. Her blue uniform was torn in places, and dirt smudged her pale skin. The uniform had markings on it that Breaker recognized from his years of observation. Colony transport crew. Probably grabbed when the Zenthari raided some civilian ship for cargo. The guards weren't gentle. They shoved her forward and she stumbled but didn't fall. Breaker noticed she kept her head up, her shoulders back. Most prisoners came in here broken already, crying or begging. Not this one. Corvin, the lead interrogator, was a tall Zenthari with darker gray skin than the others. He had a reputation for being efficient and cruel. He grabbed the girl by the arm and forced her into the interrogation chair. The metal restraints snapped shut around her wrists and ankles with a harsh click that echoed through the block. Breaker shifted in his cage, moving closer to the plasma barrier to get a better view. Something felt wrong about this situation, though he couldn't quite figure out what. Corvin activated his translator collar. When he spoke, his words came out flat and emotionless like a machine. Colony locations. Give me coordinates. Make this easy and your pain will be short. The girl looked right at him. Breaker could see her ID badge from where he stood. Rachel Bennett. She lifted her chin and met Corvin's eyes without flinching. I don't know what you're talking about. The slap came fast. Corvin's hand cracked across her face hard enough that her head snapped to the side. Blood welled up from her split lip and dripped down her chin. Still she didn't cry. Didn't beg. Breaker's 4 eyes narrowed as he studied her more carefully. He'd learned over the years to read different species, to understand their body language and emotions. It helped him survive in the fighting pits. He could tell when an opponent was afraid, when they were angry, when they were about to attack. This human girl was afraid. He could see it in the slight tremor in her hands, in the way her breathing had gotten faster. But there was something else in her expression as she looked at Corvin. Something Breaker had never seen before in all his years watching prisoners in this place. She looked at her torturer with pity. Like she felt sorry for him. That made no sense. Why would the victim pity her captor? Corvin didn't seem to notice or care about her expression. He reached for a device mounted on the interrogation chair. Breaker recognized it immediately. The neural disruptor. A cruel piece of technology designed to flood the nervous system with pain signals. It didn't leave marks, didn't cause permanent damage, but it hurt worse than anything else in the interrogator's arsenal. Last chance, Corvin said. Colony coordinates. Rachel Bennett just shook her head. Corvin activated the device. The scream that came from the girl's throat was raw and terrible. It echoed off the metal walls of the detention block, making even some of the guards wince. Breaker had heard thousands of screams in this place, but something about this one made his hide prickle with unease. His sensory tendrils, which could detect electromagnetic frequencies that most species couldn't perceive, suddenly twitched. There was something in the air. A signal. Very faint but definitely there. Breaker's eyes tracked to the corner where the Zenthari had dumped the girl's belongings in a careless pile. Her bag, some tools, a water container, and a small metallic device about the size of a human fist. The guards hadn't even bothered to examine it properly. They just tossed it aside with everything else. That device was broadcasting something. A signal going out into space, cutting through the interference that normally blocked communications from this station. And somewhere out there, something was receiving that signal. Breaker looked back at Rachel Bennett, still screaming as the neural disruptor did its work. She'd known. Somehow she'd known this would happen. That's why she looked at Corvin with pity. She wasn't the one in danger here. They were. 13 minutes had passed since Corvin started his interrogation. Breaker kept count automatically, a habit from his years in the fighting pits where knowing how much time had passed could mean the difference between life and death. Rachel Bennett hung limply in the restraints now. Corvin had cycled the neural disruptor 3 times, each burst lasting 30 seconds. Between the shocks, she gasped for air, her whole body shaking. But she still hadn't given them anything. Not a single word. Breaker tilted his massive head, listening. His hearing was far more sensitive than the Zentharies. They were too focused on their prisoner to notice what he could detect. There was a sound, very low, almost below the range of normal hearing. A vibration that traveled through the station's hull and made the metal hum in a way that wasn't natural. Something was coming. Something big. The vibration grew stronger with each passing second. Breaker's 4 eyes tracked the movement of the guards. They were getting restless, shifting their weight from foot to foot, checking their weapons without really knowing why. Animals could sense when predators were near, even when they couldn't see or hear them. The Zenthari guards were feeling that same instinct now, but they didn't understand what it meant. Rachel lifted her head. Her face was pale, covered in sweat, and blood still dripped from her split lip. But her eyes were clear. She turned her head slowly toward Breaker's cage, and their eyes met across the detention block. Through cracked and bleeding lips, she mouthed 2 words. No sound came out, but Breaker understood them clearly. "I'm sorry." The creature blinked in confusion. Sorry? Why would she apologize? She was the one being tortured. She was the victim here. What did she have to be sorry about? Then it hit him. She wasn't apologizing to Corvin or the guards. She was apologizing to Breaker. Because he was caged here and whatever was about to happen, he couldn't escape it. Before Breaker could process that thought, every light in the detention block died. Complete darkness swallowed them for half a second. Then emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in deep red light. The sudden change made shadows dance across the walls in strange patterns. The Zenthari guards jerked their weapons up, spinning in circles, trying to cover all directions at once. Their translator collars crackled with confused chatter. What happened to the lights? I don't know, check your sector. All channels are down. Corvin slammed his fist on the interrogation chair controls. Engineering. Report. What's happening to my station? Static answered him. Whatever had cut the main power had also killed most of their communications. Then came the sound that made even Breaker's blood run cold. Boom, boom, boom. A rhythmic pounding echoed through the hull, shaking dust from the ceiling panels. It wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. Something was deliberately striking the outer hull of the station, over and over, with perfect timing. One of the younger guards, a Zenthari who couldn't have been more than a few years in service, backed toward the door. That's not debris. That's controlled. Something's cutting through. The station's AI system suddenly blared to life, its normally calm voice replaced with something that sounded almost like panic. Alert. Unidentified vessel detected. Hull breach imminent. Defensive systems are offline. Repeat. All defensive systems are offline. Corvin's gray skin went even paler. That's impossible. We have redundant systems. Backups for the backups. They're all dead, another guard said, staring at his handheld scanner. Everything. Weapons, shields, point defense cannons. Everything went offline at the same time. How? I don't know. It's like something just reached in and switched them all off at once. The pounding continued. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact was getting closer, working its way through the station's hull layers. Whatever was doing this wasn't using brute force. It was precision cutting, the kind that required advanced tools and someone who knew exactly what they were doing. One of the guards broke. He ran for the exit, his weapon clattering to the floor. I'm not dying here. I'm not. The pounding stopped. Sudden silence filled the detention block. It was somehow worse than the noise. Everyone froze, even Corvin. The only sound was Rachel's ragged breathing and the quiet hum of the emergency lights. Breaker's sensory tendrils were going crazy, picking up electromagnetic signals, heat signatures, and vibrations that painted a picture the Zenthari couldn't see. There was someone on the other side of the wall. Right there. Just 3 meters of reinforced durasteel between them and the detention block. 3 seconds of perfect, terrible silence. Then a section of the wall just fell inward. Not an explosion. Not melted or blasted. Just a perfect circle, 3 meters across, cut so precisely that the edges still glowed orange from whatever tool had made them. The metal disc hit the floor with a deafening crash that made everyone jump. Through the opening, a single figure dropped into the room. He landed in a crouch, absorbing the impact easily, then stood slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. The figure was covered head to toe in matte black armor that seemed to absorb the red emergency lighting. No markings. No insignia. Nothing to identify who or what this was. The helmet had a reflective visor that showed only the frightened faces of the Zenthri guards staring back at themselves. But Breaker knew what this was. Human. The figure's head turned with mechanical precision, scanning the room. It paused on each guard, on Corvin, on Breaker's cage. Then it stopped, locked onto Rachel Bennett still strapped to the interrogation chair. When the human spoke, his voice came through a processor in the helmet that stripped away all emotion, all humanity, leaving something cold and mechanical and absolutely terrifying. Target acquired. One of the guards raised his weapon, his hands shaking so badly the barrel wobbled in the air. The human moved. And everything changed. The human moved so fast that Breaker's predatory instincts kicked in before his conscious mind could process what was happening. This was the speed of something that hunted for a living. Something built to kill. The first Zenthri guard was still trying to pull his weapon from its holster when the human's gun came up. A soft phut sound, barely louder than a cough, and the guard dropped. No dramatic fall. No last words. Just there 1 second, gone the next. A single shot through the head, clean and precise. The second guard actually managed to get his rifle up. He was fast, well-trained. It didn't matter. 3 rounds hit him in the chest so quickly they sounded like one continuous burst. The guard's armor cracked under the impacts, and he fell backward into a control console. The whole thing took maybe 2 seconds. Corvin, the interrogator, made a desperate choice. He abandoned the interrogation controls and lunged toward Rachel, his hands reaching for her throat. If he had a hostage, maybe he could negotiate. Maybe he could survive this. He never got the chance to find out. The human covered 15 meters in the time it took Corvin to take 3 steps. Breaker had seen plenty of predators move in his life, but nothing like this. The armored figure moved with purpose and absolute confidence, like he'd done this exact thing 1,000 times before. Corvin's hand was inches from Rachel's throat when the human's gauntlet hand intercepted his wrist. The grip was iron hard. Corvin tried to pull free, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Then the human twisted. The crack of breaking bone echoed through the detention block. Corvin's wrist bent backward at an angle that made even Breaker wince. The interrogator's mouth opened to scream, but the human's other hand shot forward, striking Corvin's throat with surgical precision. The scream died into a wet gurgle as the interrogator collapsed, clutching his crushed windpipe. "You put your hands on a protected," the human said, and his processed voice was completely flat. No anger. No satisfaction. Just a simple statement of fact. That was a mistake. Corvin's eyes went wide with terror as he realized he was dying. He tried to speak, to beg, but only blood bubbled from his lips. The human didn't watch him die. He'd already moved on, scanning for the next threat. More figures poured through the circular breach in the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4. They kept coming. 6, 7, 8 humans, all in identical matte black armor, all moving with that same terrifying precision. They fanned out through the detention block like water flowing downhill, taking up positions, covering angles, moving as if they shared one mind. Breaker had seen military units before. The Zenthri had their own special forces teams that sometimes came through this station. But those teams had to talk to each other, had to call out positions and threats. These humans didn't speak. They just knew where each other was, what each other was doing. They moved like a pack of apex predators, and everyone in the room was prey. 2 Zenthri guards near the main entrance tried to organize a defense. They flipped over a metal table for cover and opened fire. Their plasma bolts lit up the red-tinted air, leaving glowing trails. The humans didn't even slow down. They moved as if they could see the shots coming before they were fired. One human went left, another went right, a third slid on his knees across the smooth floor. Their return fire was methodical. Controlled bursts that punched through the overturned table like it was paper. Both guards went down. The humans didn't even pause to confirm the kills. They just kept moving. A younger Zenthri guard, panicking, threw himself toward an alarm panel on the far wall. His hand slammed down on the activation button. For a brief second, hope flickered in his eyes. Reinforcements would come. They just had to hold out. One of the humans adjusted his aim without breaking stride and fired. The alarm panel exploded in a shower of sparks. The guard stared at the destroyed panel in disbelief. The same human fired again. The guard dropped. That's when Breaker understood. These humans weren't here to capture the station. They weren't here to interrogate prisoners or gather intelligence or take hostages. They came for Rachel Bennett. Everything and everyone else was just an obstacle to remove. The lead human, the first one through the breach, reached Rachel's interrogation chair. His movements changed instantly. The brutal efficiency was still there, but his hands became careful, almost gentle as he worked the restraint controls. The metal bands around Rachel's wrists and ankles popped open. "Easy, Rachel," the human said, and even through the voice processor, there was something softer in his tone. "Your father sent us. Ghost Company doesn't leave people behind." Rachel's head lolled to the side, exhausted from the torture. But she managed a weak smile. "Told them," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Told them you'd come." Movement caught the human's attention. His helmet snapped to the side, tracking Corvin. The interrogator was somehow still alive, crawling across the floor with his one good arm. His shattered arm dragged uselessly behind him, leaving a trail of blood. He was reaching for a backup alarm panel hidden behind a support pillar. The human stood in one smooth motion. His hand dropped to a sidearm on his hip, drew it and fired twice. Both rounds hit Corvin in the head. The interrogator's body went limp, his reaching hand falling just centimeters short of the alarm. "Negative," the human said, his voice returning to that flat, mechanical tone. "No alarms. No warnings. Just consequences." Around the detention block, the other humans had finished clearing the room. 8 Zenthari guards had been in the block when this started. Now there was only silence, broken only by the hum of emergency lights and Rachel's labored breathing. The whole thing, from breach to complete elimination, had taken less than 30 seconds. Breaker watched from his cage, his 4 eyes wide. He'd survived 12 years in the fighting pits by understanding violence, by knowing when to fight and when to submit. He understood now why Rachel had looked at her captors with pity. The Zenthari had hurt someone humanity cared about. And humanity had responded with absolute, unstoppable force. One of the humans broke away from the group and approached Breaker's containment cell. His armor had some kind of identifier on the shoulder plate, though Breaker couldn't read human writing. The weapon in the human's hands stayed pointed directly at Breaker's center mass. "Professional. Careful. Jake, we've got a Krevtar in captivity here," the human called out. His voice through the helmet processor sounded younger than the leader's. "What are your orders?" The lead human, the one who'd come through the wall first, turned away from Rachel for a moment. Jake. That was apparently his name. He studied Breaker with that same calculating intensity he'd used when scanning the room for threats. It wasn't a casual glance. It was the look of someone taking measurements, assessing capabilities, determining threat levels. Breaker had been evaluated like this before, back in the fighting pits. Handlers and betters would study him, trying to figure out if he'd win or lose his next match. But this was different. Jake wasn't looking at him like property or entertainment. He was looking at him like an equal. One fighter sizing up another. Rachel's voice, weak and hoarse, cut through the tension. She was wrapped in some kind of silver thermal blanket that one of the soldiers had pulled from their equipment pack. "Wait," she said, struggling to sit up straighter. "The creature. It didn't hurt me. It was watching the whole time. Like it understood something." Jake's helmet tilted slightly, but his eyes, whatever they looked like behind that reflective visor, never left Breaker. The creature could feel the weight of that stare. This human was making a decision, and Breaker's life hung in the balance. The silence stretched for several long seconds. Then Jake spoke directly to him. "Can you fight?" The question caught Breaker off guard. Not, "Will you fight us?" or, "Are you a threat?" Just a simple, direct question about capability. Breaker's translator collar activated, converting his natural growling vocalization into something the humans could understand. The sound that came out was grinding, mechanical, but affirmative. Yes, he could fight. Jake nodded once, a short, sharp movement. "Then you get 2 choices," he said, and his processed voice somehow managed to sound both cold and completely matter-of-fact, like he was explaining simple math. "Stay in that cage and die when we scuttle the station in 6 minutes." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or come with us. We'll drop you somewhere far from Zenthari space. Somewhere you can disappear." Breaker's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Freedom. After 12 years, this human was offering freedom. But there was more coming. There had to be. "But if you come," Jake continued, "you remember what you saw here today. You remember it clearly. And you tell every species you meet what happens when humans are pushed. When someone takes one of ours and hurts them." Another pause. Clear? It was a message. Jake didn't just want to free a prisoner. He wanted a witness. Someone who could spread the word about what Ghost Company did to slavers who tortured human children. It was strategic. Calculated. Terrifying in its implications. But it was also an offer of life when Breaker had expected death. His massive head nodded once, slowly, deliberately. Jake raised his weapon in one smooth motion and fired 3 rounds into the containment cell's lock mechanism. Sparks flew as the technology shattered. The humming plasma barrier that had held Breaker for 12 years flickered, sputtered, and died. The door, no longer held by magnetic locks, swung open with a creak. Fresh air, not filtered through the cell's recycling system, hit Breaker's face for the first time in over a decade. It smelled like smoke and ozone and freedom. "Ryan, Tom," Jake called out to 2 of his team members. "Get our guest moving. We're on a clock." The humans shifted their formation instantly, making room for Breaker without exposing themselves to potential threats. They moved around him like water flowing around a rock, natural and practiced. As the team started moving toward the breach in the wall, one of the humans, Tom, apparently stayed behind. He pulled a small rectangular device from a pouch on his belt. It was about the size of a human hand, with several blinking lights on its surface. He moved to the detention block's main computer terminal and attached the device with a magnetic click. His fingers danced across the terminal's interface for a few seconds. Lines of code that Breaker didn't understand flashed across the screen. Then Tom stepped back, satisfied. "Present for our hosts," Tom said, and even through the voice processor, Breaker could hear the grim satisfaction. "Uploading now." Jake, who had Rachel supported against his shoulder, checked something on his forearm. Some kind of display built into his armor. 4 minutes until detonation. Now. Detonation. They weren't just leaving. They were destroying the entire station. Everyone still alive on this facility had 4 minutes to realize what was about to happen and 4 minutes to feel the fear that their victims had felt. The team moved as one unit toward the breach. 2 humans went first, weapons up, scanning for threats. Then Jake with Rachel. Then Breaker with Ryan and Tom on either side of him. 2 more humans brought up the rear, walking backward, covering their exit. They moved quickly but carefully, their boots making almost no sound on the metal floor. Rachel's head rested against Jake's armored shoulder, her eyes half closed from exhaustion and pain. But she was alive. That's what mattered to these humans. As they climbed through the breach and into the corridor beyond, Breaker glanced back one last time at the detention block. At the cage where he'd spent 12 years. At the bodies of the Zenthari guards scattered across the floor. At Corvin's corpse, still reaching for the alarm he never reached. Jake was right. Breaker would remember this. He would tell others. The galaxy needed to know what happened when you hurt someone humanity decided to protect. And the answer was simple and absolute. They came for you. 42 minutes had passed since Jake and his team had blown a hole through the detention block wall. Now Breaker stood inside a human spacecraft, something he never thought he'd experience. The ship was smaller than he expected, built for speed rather than comfort. Everything was efficient, compact, and spotlessly maintained. The medical bay where they'd taken Rachel was cramped, but it had more advanced equipment than anything Breaker had seen in Zenthari space. Rachel sat on the edge of a medical bed, looking remarkably better than she had less than an hour ago. Her split lip had already closed, leaving only a faint pink line. The bruises on her face were fading. Whatever technology the humans were using, it worked fast. Breaker moved to the viewport, his massive frame making the small medical bay feel even smaller. Through the reinforced glass, he could still see the Zenthari station hanging in the darkness of space. It looked peaceful from this distance, just another structure among the stars. But Breaker knew better. He knew what was coming. The door to the medical bay slid open with a soft hiss and Jake stepped inside. This was the first time Breaker had seen him without the helmet, and the sight was surprising. Jake was younger than his voice suggested. Maybe 30 years old, possibly younger. His brown hair was cut short and practical. But it was his face that told the real story. Scars. Several of them crisscrossing his left cheek and forehead. These weren't the random marks of accidents. They were the evidence of combat, of violence survived. And his eyes, a dark gray color, had that look that Breaker recognized from his fellow pit fighters. The look of someone who'd seen too much death too early in their life. 1 minute, Jake said quietly, moving to stand beside Breaker at the viewport. They watched in silence. Rachel shifted on her medical bed to get a better view. Even Tom and Ryan, 2 of the other team members, stopped what they were doing to watch. Then it happened. The station erupted. But it wasn't a single massive explosion like Breaker expected. Instead, it was a carefully choreographed sequence. Small detonations rippled across the structure in a precise pattern, each one triggering the next. The explosions hit structural weak points, support beams, and connection nodes. Within seconds, the entire station was coming apart. This wasn't random destruction. This was calculated demolition. The station broke into pieces that would never be reassembled, never be salvaged. It was a complete and total erasure. "You killed everyone," Breaker said through his translator. It wasn't quite a question, more an observation that needed confirmation. Jake kept watching the debris scatter. Everyone who participated, yes. Everyone who watched and did nothing to stop it, most of them. He turned to look at Breaker, those gray eyes measuring. "You get a pass because you were locked in a cage. You couldn't have helped even if you wanted to. But more importantly, Rachel says you didn't add to her suffering. That matters to us." Breaker's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this. "Why?" he asked. "Why such extreme violence for one young human? I've seen wars started over less, but this seems personal." Jake walked over to Rachel and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The gesture was protective, almost fatherly. Because she's 16 years old. Just a kid. Because her father, David Bennett, runs a colony where he helps refugees from a dozen different species find new homes. Good people trying to do good things. His voice grew harder, colder. Because every human child carries a subdermal beacon, a tracker we inject at birth. When one activates, it means they're in real danger. And because humanity decided a long time ago that anyone who harms our children learns a lesson the entire galaxy remembers. Tom's voice crackled through the ship's communication system. "Jake, the upload finished. Broadcasting on all Zen3 frequencies now." A screen on the wall flickered to life. Security footage began playing, showing Rachel's interrogation in grainy detail. Corvin activating the neural disruptor. Rachel screaming. Then the footage switched to Ghost Company's assault. The breach. The elimination of the guards. The precision. The speed. Finally, Jake's face filled the screen, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "To the Zen3 Empire and any species engaged in slaving operations, this is your only warning. Humanity marks its children with tracking beacons. When you take one of ours, you don't get ransom negotiations. You don't get diplomatic meetings. You don't get prisoner exchanges. You get Ghost Company, and we don't leave survivors when protected individuals are harmed." Jake's face on the screen was completely expressionless, making the words even more chilling. "You tortured a 16-year-old girl for 15 minutes? We destroyed your station and everyone aboard in 23 minutes. Consider the math. Consider the ratio. Humanity remembers every wrong done to us. Humanity responds with overwhelming force. And humanity does not forgive those who hurt our children." The transmission ended, leaving only static on the screen. Rachel reached out from her medical bed, her small hand touching Breaker's massive clawed one. The size difference was almost comical, but the gesture was sincere. "Thank you for not hurting me," she said softly. "You're free now. Make good choices with that freedom." In that moment, Breaker understood something profound. Something the Zen3 had been too arrogant to comprehend. Humans didn't just protect their own with violence. They also remembered acts of mercy, moments of restraint, choices not to add suffering when suffering was everywhere. Rachel had been tortured in front of him and he'd done nothing. But he'd also done nothing to make it worse. And somehow, to these humans, that mattered. They rewarded that choice with his freedom and his life. But for those who crossed the line, who actively harmed what humanity cherished, hell didn't just break loose in some chaotic fury. Hell came with precision, with planning, with purpose. Hell came in the form of Ghost Company, and they would find you no matter how far you ran or how well you hid. Jake looked at Breaker one final time. "We'll drop you at Freeport Station in 2 days. After that, you're on your own. But remember what you saw. Tell others. Make sure they understand." Breaker nodded slowly, turning back to watch the last pieces of the Zen3 station scatter into the void like dust in the wind. He would remember this day for the rest of his life. And he would tell others what he witnessed. The galaxy needed to understand a simple truth. Humans protected their own with absolute determination. And the consequences for forgetting that lesson were total and final.